The iron bars of the jail cell cast long shadows across the dirt floor as Delilah Vance pressed her forehead against the cool metal, watching the small, dusty town of Coolidge, Arizona Territory, come alive with the morning light. 3 months she'd been locked away in this cage, branded a sinner, a harlot, a murderess, though the only thing she'd killed was a man's pride. The year was 1875, and in Coolidge, a woman's reputation was as fragile as morning dew and twice as quick to evaporate under scrutiny. At 22, Delilah had learned this lesson the hard way. "Mail's here for you, Miss Vance," Sheriff Tanner announced, sliding a single envelope through the bars. His gray mustache twitched with what might have been sympathy. In the 3 months she'd been his prisoner, he'd never been cruel, just dutiful. Delilah took the letter with trembling fingers. "From the governor," the sheriff shook his head. "Territorial judge. He'll be here in 2 weeks' time. 2 weeks." 14 more days in this cell before she'd learn if she'd hang for a crime she didn't commit, or be sentenced to years of imprisonment far from home. Delilah clutched the letter to her chest, feeling the weight of injustice pressing down harder than the summer heat. "You got visitors too," Sheriff Tanner added, gesturing toward the door. "The Reverend's wife brought you some clean things." Mrs. Palmer entered, her pinched face a mixture of Christian charity and judgment as she placed a small bundle of clothing on the cell's single chair. She'd been bringing Delilah fresh garments once a week since her imprisonment, a kindness that came with the price of lengthy sermons about female virtue and the path to redemption. "Thank you, Mrs. Palmer," Delilah said softly, knowing what would come next. "I've brought Reverend Palmer's latest sermon for you to reflect upon," the older woman said, placing a folded paper atop the clothes. "It concerns the wages of sin and the mercy of confession." Delilah nodded, having heard variations of this same sermon throughout her confinement. They all wanted her to confess to admit she'd seduced Edward Blackridge, the son of the wealthiest rancher in the territory, and then shot him when he refused to marry her. The story was a lie concocted by Edward himself after Delilah had rejected his drunken advances. But Edward's father owned half the territory and had friends in high places, while Delilah was just the daughter of a dead miner with nothing but her small dress shop to her name. After Mrs. Palmer left, Delilah opened the judge's letter with shaking hands. The contents were brief but clear. Her case would be heard on August 15th, and she should prepare herself accordingly. Prepare herself. As if there were anything she could do locked in this cell with no lawyer to speak for her, and no witnesses brave enough to stand against the Blackridge family. Outside the jailhouse window, Delilah could see riders arriving cowboys from the surrounding ranches coming into town for supplies and entertainment. Among them was a tall figure on a chestnut stallion, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. She didn't recognize him, which meant he was either passing through or new to these parts. Either way, he was free to ride under the vast Arizona sky while she remained caged like an animal. Delilah turned away from the window and sat on her narrow cot, carefully unfolding Mrs. Palmer's sermon paper. But instead of reading the Reverend's words about sin and salvation, she used the blank backside to continue the journal she'd been keeping. If she was to be condemned, at least the truth would exist somewhere, even if no one ever read it. Isaac Quinn dismounted outside the Coolidge Mercantile, his boots hitting the packed earth with a thud that matched his mood. 3 weeks of hard riding from Texas had left him dusty, irritable, and in desperate need of supplies before pushing on to the Silver Creek Ranch he'd purchased sight unseen. New in town. The question came from a portly man sweeping the boardwalk in front of the general store. "Just arrived," Isaac replied, tying his horse to the hitching post. "Isaac Quinn. Milton Weaver, owner of this fine establishment. The man extended a hand that Isaac shook firmly. What brings you to our little corner of the Arizona Territory? Bought the old Davidson place out by Silver Creek. Aimed to run cattle. Weaver's eyebrows shot up. That's mighty ambitious. Place has been abandoned since old man Davidson passed 2 years back. Heard it was in rough shape. Nothing hard work won't fix, Isaac replied, though inwardly he wondered if he'd made a mistake. The letter from the land agent had described the property as requiring some maintenance, which could mean anything from broken fence posts to a collapsed roof. Well, you'll be needing supplies then. Come on in. Isaac followed Weaver into the mercantile, his eyes adjusting to the dimmer light. The store was well stocked, shelves lined with everything from food staples to tools, fabric, and ammunition. Where'd you come from, Mr. Quinn? Weaver asked as he began gathering the items on Isaac's list. San Antonio originally. Been working cattle drives the past 5 years, saved enough to buy my own spread. Long way from home, Weaver commented. Not many strangers settle in these parts. Most are just passing through to California. I go where opportunity leads, Isaac said simply, not mentioning the ghosts he was leaving behind in Texas, a failed engagement, the death of his younger brother in a senseless barroom brawl, and the growing feeling that life was passing him by at 31 years of age. As Weaver tallied up his purchases, Isaac noticed a commotion outside. Through the window, he saw a group of men gathered near the jailhouse across the street, their voices carried, angry and loud. What's all that about? He asked. Weaver's expression darkened. That would be about the Vance woman. Been locked up these past 3 months awaiting trial. What'd she do? Shot Edward Blackridge, or so they say, son of the biggest rancher in the territory. Boy survived, thankfully, but it's caused quite the stir. Isaac watched as Sheriff Tanner emerged from the jailhouse, rifle in hand, to disperse the crowd. Sounds like some folks have already decided she's guilty. Most have, Weaver admitted. Edward claims she tried to trap him into marriage, then shot him when he refused. She claims he attacked her and she never fired a gun. Truth somewhere in between, I expect. And the trial, judge arrives in 2 weeks. But between you and me, Weaver lowered his voice. Doesn't matter much what really happened. Old man Blackridge practically owns this town, and his boy's word carries more weight than a pretty dressmaker with no family to speak for her. Isaac frowned. Doesn't seem right. Right don't always factor into justice out here, Mr. Quinn. Weaver handed him his change. That'll be $12.43. Isaac paid and gathered his supplies, but his eyes drifted back to the jailhouse. Through a small barred window, he caught a glimpse of a woman's face, pale, with dark hair framing features that seemed too delicate for a murderer. Their eyes met briefly before she turned away, but in that fleeting moment, Isaac saw something that haunted him the rest of the day. Not guilt, not rage, but a dignified resignation that spoke of innocence facing inevitable punishment. That night, as Isaac made camp a few miles outside town, the woman's face returned to his thoughts. He'd seen enough in his years on the frontier to know that justice was often a luxury, especially for those without money or influence. But something about this situation gnawed at him, perhaps because he himself knew what it was to be judged unfairly. Or perhaps because those resigned eyes reminded him too much of his brothers before they closed the lid on his coffin. With a sigh, Isaac rolled himself in his blanket beneath the vast canopy of stars. He had his own problems, a neglected ranch to resurrect, cattle to purchase, and a new life to build. The fate of Delilah Vance, whatever her sins might be, wasn't his concern. Yet as he drifted off to sleep, the image of her face framed by iron bars persisted, along with an unsettling thought. What if she was telling the truth? The following morning dawned hot and bright, promising another scorching day in the Arizona Territory. Delilah awoke to the sounds of the town stirring merchants opening their shops, horses and wagons moving along the main street, voices calling greetings in the fresh morning air. Sounds of freedom that grew more torturous with each passing day. She splashed water from the small basin onto her face and used the brush Mrs. Palmer had brought to tame her dark hair. These small rituals of normalcy helped maintain her sanity, even as hope dwindled like water in the desert heat. Sheriff Tanner arrived with breakfast, a plate of beans, a hard biscuit, and coffee. Judge Hollister's reputation precedes him, he commented as he passed the tray through the bars. They say he's fair-minded at least. Fair-minded enough to stand against Randall Blackridge. Delilah asked, taking the tray. The sheriff's silence was answer enough. After breakfast, Delilah was surprised by an unexpected visitor, Mabel Cooper, a widow who had been one of her regular customers at the dress shop. "I brought you some reading material," Mabel said, passing 2 books through the bars. "Thought you might be going mad with boredom in here." Delilah accepted the books gratefully. "Thank you. I've read the Bible so many times I could recite half of it by memory." Mabel glanced over her shoulder, then leaned closer to the bars. "Listen, I've been thinking about what you said happened that night, with young Blackridge, I mean." Delilah's heart quickened. "Yes, I believe you," Mabel whispered. "Edward's always been a spoiled brat with wandering hands. I've seen how he looks at the young women in town." Hope flickered in Delilah's chest. "Would you testify to that? When the judge arrives," Mabel's face fell. I want to help, truly I do, but Randall Blackridge holds the mortgage on my home if I spoke against his son." The hope died as quickly as it had risen. "I understand," Delilah said softly, and she did. In a place like Coolidge, survival often meant silence. "I'm sorry," Mabel said, genuine regret in her eyes, "but I wanted you to know someone believes you." After Mabel left, Delilah sat with the books in her lap, fighting back tears. Someone believed her, but not someone powerful enough to make a difference. Outside, the day grew hotter. Through her window, Delilah watched the activities in the dusty street, her shop visible just 2 buildings down. She wondered if it would even be hers when this was over, or if Edward's lies would take everything she'd worked for along with her freedom or her life. Around midday, she spotted the cowboy from the day before, the tall stranger on the chestnut horse. He was loading supplies onto a pack horse outside the mercantile, his movements efficient and purposeful. There was something different about him, something that set him apart from the local ranch hands who frequented Coolidge. Perhaps it was the way he stood, shoulders square and head high. Or maybe it was simply that he wasn't part of the daily tableau she'd memorized through her window. As if sensing her gaze, the man suddenly looked up toward the jail. Their eyes met again, and this time, instead of looking away, he tipped his hat in a gesture that might have been respect. Delilah found herself nodding in return before he mounted his horse and rode out of town, the pack horse trailing behind. That brief, wordless exchange stayed with her throughout the afternoon. A small reminder that the world continued to turn beyond her cell, that strangers still arrived. Life moved forward, and perhaps somewhere justice might still exist, even if it seemed to have abandoned Coolidge. Isaac's first week at Silver Creek Ranch was a brutal reminder of how deceiving words on paper could be. The requiring some maintenance property turned out to be nearly derelict, the main house missing half its roof, the barn door hanging by one hinge, and the corral fences collapsed in several places. The only things that matched the land agent's description were the creek itself, which ran clear and strong through the property, and the stunning views of distant mountains. He worked from dawn till dusk, repairing what he could with the limited supplies he'd brought from town. The physical labor was a welcome distraction from his thoughts, which kept returning to the woman in the jail cell. During his second supply run to Coolidge, he found himself deliberately passing by the jailhouse, eyes scanning the small window for a glimpse of her face. "Becoming quite the regular, Mr. Quinn," Milton Weaver commented when Isaac entered the mercantile for the third time that week. "Ranch keeping you busy." "Busier than expected," Isaac admitted, handing over his list of needed items. Agent wasn't exactly forthcoming about the condition of the place. Weaver chuckled. "Agents rarely are, but Silver Creek's good land water year-round, decent grazing. Old man Davidson did well there before his health failed." As Weaver gathered his supplies, Isaac casually asked, "That woman in the jail, Vance, was it? What's her story? Before the shooting, I mean." Weaver gave him a curious look. "Delilah Vance. Came here about 4 years ago, opened a dress shop. Keeps to herself mostly, though her work's good enough that most of the women in town use her services." He paused, weighing his words. "Pretty thing. Maybe too pretty for her own good in a place like this." "What do you mean by that?" "Just that a woman alone draws attention, especially one who looks like her." Weaver lowered his voice. "Edward Blackridge has a reputation with the ladies. Usually they don't say no to a man whose father owns half the territory. But she did, so the story goes. Edward claims she led him on, tried to trap him, then shot him when her plan failed. She claims he forced himself on her at her shop after hours, and she never touched the gun that shot him." Weaver shrugged. "Only 2 people know the truth. And one of them's the son of the most powerful man around," Isaac finished. "Exactly so. But why the interest, Mr. Quinn? You're new here, this ain't your fight." Isaac wasn't entirely sure himself. "Just curious about the place I'm settling in," he said, which wasn't entirely a lie. A man needed to know the lay of the land, including who held the power and how they wielded it. After paying for his supplies, Isaac found himself walking toward the jailhouse instead of returning directly to his horses. Sheriff Tanner was sitting on the porch, whittling a piece of wood. "Afternoon," Isaac greeted him. "Isaac Quinn. I've taken over the Davidson place at Silver Creek," the sheriff nodded. "Heard we had a new rancher. Welcome to Coolidge." He sized Isaac up with experienced eyes. "Something I can help you with?" Isaac hesitated, then decided directness was best. "Wondering about the woman you've got locked up. Heard different versions of what happened." Sheriff Tanner's expression remained neutral. "Miss Vance is awaiting trial for the attempted murder of Edward Blackridge. Beyond that, I don't gossip about my prisoners." "Respect that," Isaac said with a nod. "Just trying to understand the situation." "Situation's simple enough. Judge arrives in a week, hears the case, makes his ruling. Law takes its course." The sheriff returned to his whittling. "Word of advice. Mr. Quinn knew ranchers do best focusing on their land and steering clear of local disputes." The warning was clear, but something made Isaac press further. "Would it be possible to speak with her? Miss Vance, I mean." The sheriff's knife paused mid-stroke. "Any particular reason?" "Just a feeling I should hear her side," Isaac said honestly. Sheriff Tanner studied him for a long moment. "She gets visitors between noon and 4. You'd be within your rights as a citizen to see her then." He returned to his whittling, adding casually, "Though Randall Blackridge might take notice of who shows interest in his son's accuser." "Appreciate the warning," Isaac said, understanding the subtext. Crossing the Blackridges could make his new life in Coolidge considerably more difficult. As he turned to leave, the sheriff added, "Tomorrow's Sunday. Reverend Palmer holds services at 10. Town's always at church, then including myself. Deputy Simmons watches the jail, but he takes his coffee at the hotel around 1 o'clock. usually gone about half an hour. His eyes met Isaac's briefly. Just town information a new settler might find useful. Isaac nodded, understanding the unspoken message. The sheriff wasn't entirely comfortable with the situation either. "Obliged for the welcome, Sheriff. Good day to you." That night, as he worked by lamplight to patch the cabin roof before the next rainfall, Isaac tried to make sense of his growing preoccupation with Delilah Vance. He'd come to Arizona to start fresh, not to involve himself in local controversies or play hero to imprisoned women, no matter how unjust their situation might seem. Yet something about her face in that window, and the town's resigned acceptance of what appeared to be a grave injustice, pulled at him like a physical force. Perhaps it was because he'd seen the same resignation in his brother's eyes, after he'd been wrongfully accused of cheating at cards, an accusation that had led to his death, when the offended party's friends caught him alone outside the saloon. Isaac had been too late to save his brother then. He hadn't even been in town when it happened, returning only to find him already laid out at the undertaker's, the local lawmen unconcerned about investigating further. "Just a card game gone wrong," they'd said, just like Delilah Vance was just a woman who shouldn't have refused a Blackridge. By morning, Isaac had made his decision. He would visit the jail during the sheriff's conveniently mentioned absence and hear Delilah's story for himself. What he did afterward would depend on what he learned, but at least he would know if the nagging feeling in his gut had merit. After all, a man couldn't build a new life with old regrets weighing on his conscience, and something told him that riding away and leaving Delilah Vance to her fate would be a regret he'd carry for the rest of his days. Sunday morning brought a stifling heat that hung over Coolidge like a wool blanket. Delilah watched from her window as the townsfolk made their way to Reverend Palmer's white clapboard church at the end of the main street. Women in their best dresses walked beside men in clean shirts and polished boots, Bibles clutched in hand, their faces solemn with Sunday reverence. Among them, she spotted the Blackridge's Randall with his silver hair and imperious bearing, walking beside his son Edward, whose arm remained in a sling though it had been over 3 months since the shooting. The sight of him made Delilah's stomach churn. He'd come to her shop that night drunk and demanding, his hands rough as he'd backed her against the wall. When she'd fought back, scratching his face and kicking his shin, he'd stumbled, knocking over a lamp. In the ensuing struggle, his own pistol had discharged, the bullet grazing his shoulder. Yet somehow, in the version he'd told afterward, she had invited him in, attempted to seduce him to force a marriage, and then shot him in rage when he rejected her advances. And because he was Edward Blackridge, his word outweighed hers, especially after his father's men found the gun in her shop, conveniently wiped clean of fingerprints, except for one partial print that might have been hers. Delilah turned away from the window as the church bell rang, summoning the faithful to worship. She wondered bitterly if Edward would pray for forgiveness today for his lies, or if he believed them himself by now. Sheriff Tanner appeared at her cell, dressed in his Sunday best. "I'm heading to services. Deputy Simmons will be watching the jail." She nodded, familiar with the routine. Young Deputy Simmons would sit at the desk out front, reading dime novels and occasionally stepping out for coffee, leaving her essentially alone for short periods. After the sheriff left, silence descended on the jailhouse. Delilah pulled out one of the books. Mabel had brought a collection of poetry that provided brief mental escapes from her confinement. She was deep in Wordsworth when she heard the front door open and close, followed by a brief exchange between Deputy Simmons and someone whose voice she didn't recognize. Footsteps approached her cell, and Delilah looked up to find herself face to face with the stranger She'd seen from her window the tall cowboy with the chestnut horse. Up close, he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps early 30s, with a weathered face that spoke of years under the open sky. His eyes were a startling blue against his sun-darkened skin, and they regarded her with an intensity that made her sit up straighter. "Miss Vance?" he asked, removing his hat. "My name is Isaac Quinn. I was hoping I might speak with you." Delilah set her book aside, curiosity overcoming caution. "Do I know you, Mr. Quinn?" "No, madam. I'm new to these parts. Bought the old Davidson place out at Silver Creek." "Then why would you want to speak with me?" she asked, wary of this unexpected visitor. In her experience, men didn't seek out accused murderesses without ulterior motives. Isaac Quinn shifted his weight, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I've heard conflicting accounts of what happened between you and Edward Blackridge. Thought I might hear your version directly." Delilah studied him, searching for signs of mockery or hidden agenda, but found only what appeared to be genuine interest. Still, she'd been fooled before. "Why would my version matter to you, Mr. Quinn? You're a stranger here." "Maybe that's why," he said quietly. "I don't have any stake in local politics or loyalties, just looking for the truth." "Truth," she repeated, a bitter smile touching her lips. "Truth hasn't counted for much in Coolidge these past 3 months." Before he could respond, Deputy Simmons appeared in the doorway. "I'm stepping out for coffee, Miss Vance. Be back in half an hour." He nodded to Isaac. "Don't cause any trouble, mister." "Wouldn't dream of it," Isaac replied evenly. When the deputy's footsteps had faded and the front door closed, Isaac moved closer to the bars. "We don't have much time. Will you tell me what really happened that night?" Something in his earnest expression, or perhaps just the desperate need to be believed by someone who might actually listen, made Delilah decide to trust him. Quickly, she related the events of that April evening, Edward arriving at her shop after closing, his drunken advances, her rejection, the struggle, and the accidental discharge of his own weapon. "I never even touched the gun," she finished. "It fell from his holster during the struggle. The next thing I knew, it had gone off, and he was bleeding. He ran out shouting that I'd shot him, and within an hour the sheriff was at my door with half the town behind him." Isaac listened without interruption, his blue eyes never leaving her face. When she finished, he nodded slowly. "I believe you." 3 simple words, yet they hit Delilah with such force that tears sprang to her eyes. She blinked them back furiously, unwilling to show such weakness before this stranger. "Believing me doesn't help much, Mr. Quinn," she said once she had control of her voice. "The judge arrives next week, and unless someone with more influence than Randall Blackridge speaks for me, I'll likely hang for a crime I didn't commit." "What about witnesses? Surely someone must have seen something." Delilah shook her head. "It was after hours. The shops on either side of mine were closed, and even if someone did see something, no one's willing to stand against the Blackridges. They own too many businesses, hold too many mortgages." Isaac's jaw tightened. "What about physical evidence? You said the gun was his." "It was, but his father's men found it in my shop the next day, wiped clean except for what they claim is my fingerprint on the trigger." She laughed humorlessly. "Convenient, isn't it?" "Very," Isaac agreed grimly. "And no one's questioned this story, not even the sheriff. Sheriff Tanner has his doubts, I think. But he follows the law as written, and the law says a formal accusation and evidence is enough to hold me for trial." Delilah moved closer to the bars. "Why are you really here, Mr. Quinn? What's your interest in my case?" Isaac was silent for a moment, as if wrestling with his answer. "I had a younger brother," he finally said. 2 years ago, he was accused of cheating at cards by a man with powerful friends. I was out of town when it happened. By the time I returned, my brother was dead, beaten to death in an alley, and the local law had already decided it was just a disagreement gone wrong. No investigation, no justice. His eyes met hers. I've seen what happens when power decides what's true, regardless of facts. I'm sorry about your brother, Delilah said softly, but my trial is in a week. Even if you believe me, what can one rancher do against the Blackridges? I don't know yet, Isaac admitted, but I aim to find out. He glanced toward the door. The deputy will be back soon. Is there anything you need? Anything I can bring you? The unexpected kindness caught her off guard. Just, perhaps some paper. I've been keeping a journal on the backs of the Reverend's sermons, but I'm running out of space. Paper, he nodded. I'll bring some tomorrow. He hesitated, then added in a lower voice, Don't lose hope, Miss Vance. You're not alone in this anymore. As he replaced his hat and turned to leave, Delilah called after him softly, Why would you help me? You don't even know me. Isaac paused at the doorway, his expression thoughtful. First night I camped outside of town, I looked up at the stars and thought about how some things should be constants like the stars in their courses and justice in its execution. Seems to me both should shine on everyone equally. His eyes held hers for a moment longer. Rest easy, Miss Vance. I'll return tomorrow. After he left, Delilah returned to her cot, her mind whirling with this unexpected development. Isaac Quinn was either the answer to prayers she'd stopped believing would be heard, or a cruel new torment hope dangled before a drowning woman only to be snatched away. Either way, his visit had given her something she'd almost forgotten, the feeling that someone saw her not as the town's scandal, but as a human being deserving of justice. That night, for the first time in months, Delilah slept without nightmares. Over the next 3 days, Isaac divided his time between working on his ranch and discreetly investigating Delilah's case. He visited her each afternoon, bringing paper as promised, along with pencils and occasionally small luxuries, a ribbon for her hair, fresh fruit, a recent newspaper. Their conversations ranged from the details of that fateful night to broader topics: her childhood in St. Louis, his years driving cattle across Texas, books they'd both read, dreams they'd harbored before life took unexpected turns. With each visit, Isaac grew more convinced of Delilah's innocence and more determined to help her. On Wednesday afternoon, as rain clouds gathered over Coolidge, Isaac arrived at the jailhouse with new information. I spoke with Jebediah Turner yesterday, he told Delilah, keeping his voice low though the sheriff was occupied with paperwork in the front office. He owns the hardware store across from your shop. Delilah leaned closer to the bars. And he claims he was working late that night and saw Edward enter your shop. Says he also heard the gunshot and saw Edward run out clutching his shoulder with the gun still in his holster. Hope flared in Delilah's eyes. Will he testify to that? Isaac's expression sobered. That's the problem. Blackridge holds the loan on his business. Turner's afraid of losing everything if he speaks against Edward. Of course, Delilah said bitterly. It always comes back to the Blackridges and their money. I'm not giving up, Isaac assured her. There's also Martha Wilson, who lives in the apartment above your shop. She told me privately that she heard Edward shouting threats before the gun went off, not after, which contradicts his story. Martha said that. Delilah was surprised. The elderly widow had always been kind but kept to herself. She did. But like Turner, she's afraid to say it publicly. Her son works at the Blackridge Ranch. Delilah sank onto her cot, the brief surge of hope evaporating. So we have witnesses who won't witness, evidence that's been tampered with, and a judge arriving in 4 days. 3, Isaac corrected grimly. Word came this morning that Judge Hollister will arrive on Saturday, not Sunday as planned. The trial is set for Monday. Thunder rumbled in the distance, a fitting accompaniment to the bleak news. Delilah fought back the despair threatening to overwhelm her. "I appreciate your efforts, Mr. Quinn, truly. But perhaps it's time to accept that some battles can't be won." "I don't believe that," Isaac said with sudden intensity. "And I don't think you do either, or you wouldn't have fought back that night." He reached through the bars, his hand hovering near hers on the edge of the cot. "Give me until Saturday. I have a few more ideas." Delilah hesitated, then placed her hand in his. His palm was rough with calluses, warm and solid against her skin. "Until Saturday," she agreed. Neither of them moved to break the contact, and something shifted in the air between them, an acknowledgement of feelings growing beyond mere justice or assistance. For a brief moment, they weren't prisoner and potential savior, but simply a man and woman connected by touch and shared purpose. The sheriff's boots in the hallway broke the spell. Isaac withdrew his hand as Sheriff Tanner appeared in the doorway. "Storm's coming in," Tanner announced, eyeing Isaac with a mixture of curiosity and resignation. "Best head back to your ranch, Quinn, before the roads turn to mud." "Appreciate the warning," Isaac replied, tipping his hat to Delilah. "Miss Vance." After he left, the sheriff lingered, watching Delilah with thoughtful eyes. "That man's taken quite an interest in your situation." "He believes in justice," Delilah said simply. "Justice," Tanner repeated, as if testing the word. "Been a lawman 23 years, Miss Vance. Seen plenty of instances where law and justice don't quite line up." He studied her for a moment longer. "Quinn's stirring up trouble, asking questions all over town. Blackridge won't like it." "Are you warning me or him?" Delilah asked. "Both, I reckon." Sheriff Tanner sighed heavily. "I've got a duty to uphold the law as written. That means holding you for trial based on the evidence presented. But a man can do his duty and still hope for the right outcome." He paused. "For what it's worth, I hope Quinn finds what he's looking for." With that cryptic statement, he left Delilah alone with her thoughts and the growing storm outside. The rain continued through the night and into the next day, turning Coolidge's dirt streets to rivers of mud and keeping most townspeople indoors. Isaac didn't appear at his usual time, and Delilah tried not to feel disappointed. The man had his own life and responsibilities. She couldn't expect him to dedicate every moment to her increasingly hopeless cause. Yet, as the hours passed with no sign of him, worry began to gnaw at her. What if the Blackridges had discovered his investigations? What if he'd been warned off, or worse, by evening, her concern had grown to full-blown anxiety. She paced her small cell, straining to hear any news from the sheriff's conversations with visitors, but learned nothing of Isaac's whereabouts. When Sheriff Tanner brought her evening meal, she couldn't contain her questions any longer. "Have you seen Mr. Quinn today?" The sheriff set the tray down. "Not since yesterday. Roads out to Silver Creek might be washed out with this rain." "Or something might have happened to him," Delilah said, voicing her fear. "Quinn strikes me as a man who can handle himself," Tanner replied, though she detected a note of concern in his voice. "Try not to worry, Miss Vance. Rain's supposed to clear by morning." But Delilah did worry, especially as night fell with no word. She slept fitfully, dreaming of Isaac confronting Edward Blackridge, of shots fired in the rain, of a chestnut horse returning riderless to Silver Creek Ranch. Dawn broke clear and bright, the storm having blown itself out overnight. Delilah awoke to the sounds of activity in the town wagons splashing through puddles, shopkeepers sweeping water from boardwalks, life returning to normal after the deluge. Mid-morning brought an unexpected visitor, Mabel Cooper, her face drawn with anxiety. "I can only stay a moment," she said hurriedly, glancing over her shoulder as if expecting to be observed. "I thought you should know there was trouble at the saloon last night." Delilah's heart sank. What kind of trouble? Was Isaac Quinn involved? Yes, Mabel confirmed. He and Edward Blackridge had words. It got heated, though no punches were thrown. But afterward, when Quinn left, some of Blackridge's ranch hands followed him out. Was he hurt? Delilah gripped the bars tightly. I don't know. Martha Wilson said she saw him riding out of town afterward, and he seemed to be sitting his horse all right. But there's talk that Randall Blackridge has sent men out to Silver Creek to have a conversation with him. A conversation, Delilah repeated hollowly, understanding the implied threat. I'm sorry, that's all I know. Mabel squeezed Delilah's hand through the bars. I have to go before anyone sees me here. Judge Hollister arrives tomorrow, and Randall Blackridge is hosting a dinner in his honor. After Mabel left, Delilah sank onto her cot, despair washing over her. Isaac had tried to help, and now he might be paying the price for interfering in Blackridge business. The guilt was almost unbearable to have dragged this good man into her troubles, possibly endangering his life, or at least his future in Coolidge. The hours crawled by with no word and no visit from Isaac. By late afternoon, Delilah had resigned herself to the likelihood that he had either been warned off effectively or was injured somewhere on his remote ranch. Either way, she was on her own again, with less than 48 hours until her fate would be decided. As dusk approached, Sheriff Tanner entered the cell area with a troubled expression. Miss Vance, I've received word that Judge Hollister will be arriving earlier than expected tonight, in fact. The trial has been moved up to tomorrow afternoon. The news hit Delilah like a physical blow. Tomorrow, but that's not enough time to prepare. I know, the sheriff said, genuine regret in his voice. Apparently the judge has another case in Phoenix he needs to get to. Randall Blackridge offered to host the proceedings at his ranch house instead of waiting for the courthouse to be ready on Monday. Of course he did, Delilah thought bitterly. Why wait when you can expedite your enemy's destruction? Is there any word about Isaac Quinn? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Sheriff Tanner's expression grew even more troubled. Nothing confirmed. There are rumors that there was an incident at his ranch last night. I'm riding out there at first light to check. An incident? Delilah felt sick. What kind of incident? Just rumors, Miss Vance, the sheriff said, not meeting her eyes. Try to get some rest. I'll have Deputy Simmons bring you an early breakfast before we transport you to the Blackridge Ranch for the trial. After he left, Delilah paced her cell in agitation. The walls seemed to be closing in, the air becoming too thick to breathe. The accelerated timeline, the change of venue to Blackridge territory, and Isaac's ominous absence all pointed to one conclusion. Randall Blackridge was taking no chances. He wanted her convicted and sentenced before anyone could interfere with his version of justice. Outside her window, stars began to appear in the deepening twilight, the same stars Isaac had spoken of that first day, the constants he'd compared to justice. But justice, it seemed, was far less constant than the heavens above. As night fully descended, Delilah finally gave in to the tears she'd been holding back. She cried for herself, for the life and dreams that would end tomorrow, and for Isaac Quinn, who had tried to help a stranger and might have suffered for his kindness. Eventually, exhausted by emotion and fear, she drifted into an uneasy sleep. Her dreams were a confusion of images: Edward's sneering face, the judge's gavel coming down, a noose tightening around her neck. Then, mysteriously, stars falling from the sky like rain, and Isaac's voice calling her name from somewhere far away. She was awakened by a sound at her window, a soft, persistent tapping. Disoriented, Delilah sat up, squinting into the darkness. The tapping came again, followed by a hushed whisper. "Delilah, wake up," she knew that voice. Rushing to the window, she peered through the bars and gasped at the sight of Isaac Quinn's face, dimly visible in the starlight. "Isaac, you're alive, more or less," he replied with a grimace that suggested pain. "Stand back from the window." Bewildered but obedient, Delilah retreated. There was a scraping sound, and then Isaac was somehow working the bars loose from their settings. "The builder who made this jail cut corners," he explained in a whisper. "Mortar's half sand. I checked earlier this week, just in case." "In case of what?" Delilah asked, though she already knew the answer. "In case we needed another option." With a final twist, the bars came free enough for him to push them inward, creating an opening barely large enough for a person to squeeze through. "Can you fit?" Delilah stared at the opening, the reality of what he was proposing sinking in. "You're breaking me out. That's a crime." "So is hanging an innocent woman," Isaac countered. "Your trial's been moved up to tomorrow at Blackridge's ranch." "The judge is in Randall's pocket. He arrived on Blackridge's private coach. This isn't going to be a trial, Delilah. It's going to be an execution." "How do you know all this?" "No time to explain. We have maybe 10 minutes before the deputy returns from his rounds." Isaac extended his hand through the opening. "Trust me, please." Delilah hesitated for only a second before grabbing the few precious possessions she couldn't bear to leave: her journal, the ribbon Isaac had brought her, a locket containing a picture of her parents. Then she took his hand and allowed him to help her through the narrow opening. Outside, the night air felt impossibly sweet after months of confinement. 2 horses waited in the shadows: Isaac's chestnut stallion and a smaller bay mare. "Can you ride?" Isaac asked, helping her mount the mare. "Yes, but where are we going?" "North, into the mountains. I have friends among the miners there." Isaac swung into his own saddle with a wince that confirmed Delilah's suspicion he was injured. "You're hurt," she said as they walked the horses quietly down the back alley behind the jail. "3 of Blackridge's men paid me a visit last night," Isaac admitted. "Nothing broken, just bruised. They were kind enough to tell me about the change in trial plans while they were working me over." Delilah felt sick. "This is my fault." "No," Isaac said firmly. "This is the fault of men who think power gives them the right to make their own laws." He glanced back at her. "We'll discuss blame later. For now, we need distance between us and Coolidge." Once they reached the edge of town, Isaac led them onto a trail that wound away from the main road, into scrubland dotted with mesquite and cacti. The night was clear, stars blazing overhead like diamonds scattered across black velvet. "When they discover I'm gone, they'll come after us," Delilah said, reality intruding on the exhilaration of escape. "You'll be charged as an accomplice." "Let them come," Isaac replied with a grim determination that sent a shiver down her spine. "I've left evidence with 3 different people, sworn statements from witnesses who were afraid to speak publicly. Documentation of the inconsistencies in Edward's story. Even a letter from the gunsmith confirming the weapon that shot Edward was his own, based on the bullet removed from his shoulder." He looked back at her, his face half shadowed in the starlight. "If anything happens to either of us, that evidence goes to the territorial governor and 3 newspapers." Delilah stared at him in amazement. "You've thought of everything." "Not everything," he admitted. "But enough, I hope, to keep us alive until we can clear your name properly." They rode in silence for a time, the horses' hooves making little sound on the soft earth. The mountains loomed ahead, dark silhouettes against the star-filled sky. Despite the danger, despite the uncertainty of their future, Delilah felt a freedom she hadn't experienced in months, perhaps years. Out here, beneath the vast canopy of stars, the petty tyrannies of men like Randall Blackridge seemed smaller somehow. "Look up," Isaac said suddenly, reining his horse to a stop. Shooting stars. Delilah tilted her head back and caught her breath at the sight of white streaks racing across the heavens, one, then three, then a dozen more. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Isaac turned in his saddle to face her, his features softened by starlight. "Delilah," he said quietly, "I need you to know something. Whatever happens from here, I believe in you. Not just your innocence, but your strength, your dignity through all this." The unexpected declaration brought tears to Delilah's eyes. "Why? You barely know me." "I know enough," he said simply. "I know you faced down Edward Blackridge rather than submit to something wrong. I know you've endured months of imprisonment without breaking. And I know that when I look at you, I see someone worth fighting for, worth risking everything for." In the silence that followed, with stars falling around them like celestial tears, something profound passed between them, an understanding deeper than words, a connection forged in shared danger and mutual respect. "You called me Delilah," she said softly, "not Miss Vance." A smile touched his lips. "I suppose I did. I like it," she admitted, returning his smile, "just as I like being here under these stars with you despite everything." Isaac's expression grew serious again. "We should keep moving. We've got a long ride ahead, and they'll start searching at first light." As they urged their horses forward, Delilah cast one last look at the star-filled sky. Perhaps justice wasn't as constant as the stars, but here, in this moment, with this man who had risked everything to save her, she felt something just as eternal taking root in her heart. Whatever the coming days might bring, pursuit, danger, uncertainty, she was no longer facing it alone. And somehow, that made all the difference. They rode through the night, pushing the horses as hard as they dared over the increasingly rough terrain. Isaac led them along game trails and dry creek beds, avoiding the main paths where Blackridge's men might search for them. By dawn, they had reached the foothills of the Pinnell Mountains, where ponderosa pines began to replace the desert scrub. "There's a mining camp about 3 hours from here," Isaac explained as they paused to rest the horses near a small spring. "The foreman, Jackson Reeves, is an old friend from my cattle driving days. He'll give us shelter while we figure out our next move." Delilah dismounted stiffly, her muscles aching from the unaccustomed hours in the saddle. The reality of their situation was beginning to sink in. "We're fugitives now," she said, the words bitter on her tongue. "I've gone from accused murderer to escaped prisoner, and you," she shook her head, "you've thrown away everything for me, your ranch, your fresh start." Isaac knelt by the spring, splashing water on his face. In the gray light of early morning, Delilah could see the extent of his injuries from the visit by Blackridge's men, a purple bruise along his jaw, a cut above his eyebrow, the careful way he favored his left side. "The ranch will still be there," he said, though they both knew it might not be as much longer. "And sometimes fresh starts come in unexpected ways." Delilah joined him at the spring, the cool water a blessing on her face and hands. "Tell me about the evidence you collected," she said. "Is there really enough to clear my name?" Isaac nodded, his expression turning businesslike. "Jebediah Turner finally agreed to sign a sworn statement that he saw Edward leave your shop with the gun still in his holster. Martha Wilson provided a written account of what she heard that night. And most importantly, I found the doctor who treated Edward's wound." Delilah looked up sharply. "Dr. Collins, but he testified to the sheriff that I shot Edward, not Collins, a doctor in Riverside, 20 miles from Coolidge. Apparently, Edward didn't go straight home that night. He rode to Dr. Maxwell in Riverside, who removed the bullet and treated the wound before Edward returned to present his story to his father and the sheriff." "Why would he do that?" Delilah frowned. "Because Maxwell doesn't depend on Blackridge money. He's new to the area and didn't recognize Edward. He just treated a man with a gunshot wound who claimed he'd had an accident while cleaning his pistol. Maxwell kept the bullet standard procedure. When I described your case to him, he checked his records and confirmed the bullet came from a Colt .45, the same model Edward carries. Hope flickered in Delilah's chest. And Dr. Maxwell will testify to this. He's already written his statement and agreed to appear before any legitimate court. Isaac paused, his blue eyes meeting hers. The problem is getting someone to listen. With Judge Hollister in Blackridge's pocket, we need to take this to a higher authority, the territorial governor or the federal marshal. Which means we need to reach Phoenix, Delilah concluded. Eventually. But first, we need a safe place to regroup and plan. They'll be searching all roads to Phoenix. Isaac stood, wincing slightly. We should move on. We want to reach the mining camp before Blackridge's men start combing these hills. They remounted and continued their ascent into the mountains. The air grew cooler as they climbed, the scent of pine replacing the dusty aroma of the desert. Delilah found herself watching Isaac straight back as he rode ahead of her, leading the way with a confidence that belied their precarious situation. This man had risked everything for her, a virtual stranger. The realization humbled her, and with each passing hour, she felt the connection between them deepening into something she was afraid to name. By mid-morning, they reached a ridge overlooking a small valley where wooden structures clustered around the entrance to a mine shaft. Men moved about like ants, some pushing ore carts while others worked at various stations around the camp. Silver Eagle Mine, Isaac explained. Jackson runs the operation for Eastern investors. It's a good outfit, fair wages, decent conditions. And importantly for us, they don't rely on Blackridge for anything. They approached cautiously, Isaac alert for any sign of danger. As they neared the outskirts of the camp, a tall man with a graying beard emerged from what appeared to be an office building, shading his eyes against the sun as he spotted them. "Quinn, that you?" he called. Isaac raised a hand in greeting. "Jackson, need a word if you've got a minute." Jackson Reeves strode toward them, his expression shifting from welcome to concern as he took in Isaac's battered appearance and the woman accompanying him. "What kind of trouble you in, son?" he asked without preamble. "The complicated kind," Isaac replied. "This is Delilah Vance. She's been wrongfully accused of a crime in Coolidge, and we need a place to lie low while we sort things out." Jackson's sharp eyes assessed Delilah. "The dressmaker heard about your case. Blackridge boy, wasn't it?" Delilah nodded, suddenly self-conscious under his scrutiny. "Yes, sir." To her surprise, Jackson spat on the ground. "Ran into that young peacock once in Coolidge. Wouldn't give him the satisfaction of calling him a man. Treated my wife like she was merchandise for sale." He turned back to Isaac. "You busted her out." "Had to," Isaac said simply. "Trial was rigged." Jackson nodded as if this explained everything. "Come on then. The missus will get you fed while you tell me the whole story. Got a cabin at the edge of camp where you can stay out of sight of casual visitors." Relief washed over Delilah. They had found sanctuary, at least temporarily. The cabin was small but clean, with 2 rooms separated by a curtain, a stone fireplace and basic furnishings. Mrs. Reeves, a kind, no-nonsense woman with capable hands and sharp eyes, brought them food and fresh water, then helped Delilah wash away the dust of their journey while Jackson tended to Isaac's injuries. "Those ribs are bruised, but not broken," Jackson announced after examining Isaac's torso. "You're lucky. Blackridge's boys aren't known for restraint. They wanted me hurting but able to ride away," Isaac said grimly. "A warning, not a death sentence." "This time," Jackson countered, "you crossed a line taking her out of that jail." Randall Blackridge doesn't forgive that kind of challenge to his authority. I know. Isaac winced as Mrs. Reeves applied a salve to the cut above his eye. That's why we need to get our evidence to someone who can override local corruption, someone Blackridge can't control. The territorial governor, Jackson nodded. Not a bad plan, except for the small matter of getting to Phoenix without being caught. Blackridge will have men watching every road and telegrams to lawmen in every town between here and there. I've been thinking about that, Isaac said. We don't go to Phoenix, not directly. We send the evidence with someone Blackridge wouldn't suspect, someone who can travel without raising suspicion. Like who? Delilah asked, emerging from behind the curtain in a clean dress borrowed from Mrs. Reeves. Isaac's expression softened at the sight of her, freshly washed and looking more like the dignified shopkeeper she'd been before her imprisonment than the fugitive of the past 12 hours. I was thinking Mrs. Reeves might help us, if she's willing. Mrs. Reeves, who had been quietly bustling about the cabin, stopped and placed her hands on her ample hips. I'm listening. You go to Phoenix every month for supplies and to visit your sister, don't you? Isaac asked. Regular as clockwork, she confirmed. Due to go next week, in fact. Would you consider going early, taking our evidence to the governor's office? As a respectable married woman on a regular trip, you wouldn't attract the kind of attention Blackridge's men are looking for. Mrs. Reeves exchanged a glance with her husband, some unspoken communication passing between them. I could leave tomorrow, she said finally. Jackson has a man driving an ore wagon to Riverside in the morning. I could ride with him, then take the stage to Phoenix from there. It would mean a lot, Isaac said softly, more than I can say. Consider it done, Mrs. Reeves said firmly. No one should hang for defending themselves against the likes of Edward Blackridge. With the plan set in motion, there was nothing to do but wait. Jackson returned to his duties at the mine after warning his workers to stay silent about their guests. Mrs. Reeves prepared a proper meal, then left them alone in the cabin with instructions to rest. The silence between Isaac and Delilah grew charged as they found themselves truly alone for the first time. Delilah sat at the small table, watching as Isaac stoked the fire against the mountain chill. Why did you do it? She asked finally. Risk everything for me. The truth, please. Isaac straightened, turning to face her. In the firelight, with his bruised face and earnest eyes, he looked both vulnerable and stronger than any man she'd ever known. The first time I saw you through that jail window, he began slowly, I saw something in your eyes that reminded me of my brother before he died, a kind of dignity in the face of injustice that broke my heart. He paused, seeming to search for the right words. Then when I spoke with you, I realized it wasn't just dignity, it was truth. Your truth, shining through despite everything they'd done to break you. He moved closer, his voice dropping. I couldn't walk away from that, not again, not after failing my brother. So it was about redemption. Delilah asked, trying to understand. Saving me to make up for not saving him. At first, maybe, Isaac admitted. But then. He hesitated, then continued with quiet intensity. Then I got to know you. Your courage, your intelligence, your refusal to break even when breaking would have been easier. And somewhere along the way, it stopped being about my past and started being about our future. Our future. The words hung in the air between them, full of possibility and danger. What kind of future can we have? Delilah whispered. We're fugitives. Even if Mrs. Reeves delivers the evidence, there's no guarantee the governor will act on it. We might spend our lives running. Isaac knelt before her chair, taking her hands in his. I don't have all the answers, Delilah. I wish I did. But I know this, whatever comes, I want to face it with you. not out of guilt or obligation, but because these past days have shown me what kind of woman you are and I." He faltered, then finished simply, "I'm falling in love with you." The confession, spoken in the quiet intimacy of the cabin, with mountain winds sighing around them and danger lurking beyond, struck Delilah with the force of revelation. This good, brave man loved her not despite her troubles, but because of the strength she'd shown through them. "Isaac," she breathed, lifting a hand to his bruised cheek. "I don't know if what I'm feeling is love or gratitude or simply the bond of shared danger, but I know I've never met anyone like you, and if we do have a future, I want you in it." He turned his face to press a kiss into her palm, and the tender gesture brought tears to her eyes. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Isaac leaned forward and brushed his lips against hers, a question more than a demand. Delilah answered by sliding her fingers into his hair and drawing him closer, deepening the kiss into something that felt like promise and hope and home all at once. When they finally parted, both breathless, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "Whatever happens," he murmured, "remember this moment. Remember that under these stars, you're not a prisoner or a fugitive, you're a woman worthy of love and respect. You're a saint in my eyes, Delilah Vance, no matter what the world calls you." In that moment, sheltered in a miner's cabin high above the world that had judged her so harshly, Delilah finally allowed herself to believe that perhaps, against all odds, they might find justice and with it, a life together under the stars that had guided them to each other. The next 3 days passed in a strange kind of limbo, peaceful in their isolation at the mining camp, yet tense with anticipation of news from Phoenix. Mrs. Reeves had departed as planned, carrying their carefully compiled evidence and sworn statements to the territorial governor's office. Now there was nothing to do but wait and hope. Jackson kept them informed of developments in Coolidge, gleaned from miners who made the trip to town for supplies. The news was both concerning and vindicating. Randall Blackridge had indeed raised a storm over Delilah's escape, offering a substantial reward for her capture and Isaac's arrest. But the manhunt had exposed the hastily arranged trial to public scrutiny, and rumors were spreading about Edward's true character and the suspicious circumstances of the shooting. "Some folks are starting to question the Blackridge version of events," Jackson reported on the evening of the 3rd day. "Sheriff Tanner's being particularly close-mouthed about the whole affair, which has folks wondering what he knows that he ain't saying." "Tanner's a good man at heart," Isaac observed, "just caught between his duty and his conscience." "Well, his silence is doing you a favor," Jackson replied. "Without the sheriff leading the charge, the search has been disorganized. Blackridge's men are covering the roads to Phoenix and the southern trails, but they haven't thought to check the mining camps yet." Delilah and Isaac had settled into a rhythm during their enforced waiting period. During the days, Isaac helped around the camp, his strength and expertise with horses making him a welcome addition to the workforce. Delilah assisted Mrs. Reeves' assistant with cooking for the miners, finding unexpected comfort in the familiar routine of domestic tasks after months of confinement. In the evenings, they would sit before the fire in their cabin, talking for hours about their lives before Coolidge, their hopes for the future if they were cleared, and the growing feelings between them. Each night ended with increasingly passionate embraces, though both tacitly agreed to wait for resolution of their uncertain situation before taking the final step in their relationship. On the 4th day, Jackson burst into the cabin shortly after noon, his expression a mixture of excitement and concern. "Rider coming up the trail," he announced. "One of the lookouts spotted him. It's Sheriff Tanner." Delilah's heart froze. "Has he come to arrest us?" "He's alone," Jackson said, which wasn't exactly an answer. I can turn him away if you want, claim I haven't seen you. Isaac and Delilah exchanged a look, a silent communication passing between them. No, Isaac decided. Let him come. If he wanted to bring us in by force, he'd have brought deputies. Your call, Jackson said doubtfully. I'll have some of the boys nearby just in case. 20 minutes later, Sheriff Tanner's weathered figure appeared in the cabin doorway. He removed his hat as he entered, his shrewd eyes taking in the domestic scene. Delilah at the table mending a shirt of Isaac's, Isaac standing protectively nearby. Miss Vance, Quinn. The sheriff nodded to each of them. You two have caused quite a stir in Coolidge. How did you find us? Isaac asked, his voice neutral. Wasn't hard, Tanner admitted. Figured you'd head for high ground away from the main roads. This is the only mining operation in these parts not beholden to Blackridge money. Simple deduction. He glanced around. Might I sit? Been a long ride. Delilah gestured to a chair. Please. The sheriff settled his lanky frame at the table, placing his hat before him. For a moment he simply studied them, his expression unreadable. Then he reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a folded document. Received this by telegram an hour ago, he said, placing it on the table. From the territorial governor's office in Phoenix. Delilah's breath caught. Mrs. Reeves must have succeeded in delivering their evidence. And, Isaac prompted when Tanner didn't elaborate. And it seems the governor has taken a personal interest in the case of Delilah Vance versus Edward Blackridge. The sheriff's mustache twitched in what might have been a suppressed smile. He's ordered a full investigation by the federal marshal's office, and in the meantime, has issued a formal stay of all local proceedings. Relief swept through Delilah so powerfully she felt lightheaded. Does that mean? It means you're not being tried in Coolidge anytime soon, Tanner confirmed. The marshal's office wants statements from all parties involved, including you too, Doctor. Maxwell from Riverside, Martha Wilson, Jebediah Turner, and several others who have suddenly found their voices now that the governor's involved. And Edward? Isaac asked. The sheriff's expression hardened. Young Mr. Blackridge has been summoned to Phoenix as well to explain certain inconsistencies in his story. His father is, as you might imagine, less than pleased by this development. I imagine he isn't, Isaac said dryly. But what about us? Are we still fugitives? Sheriff Tanner sighed, running a hand over his face. Technically, yes. Miss Vance escaped lawful custody and you aided her. That's still a crime, regardless of the circumstances. Delilah's momentary hope crumbled. They were still wanted, still running. However, Tanner continued, the governor has indicated that if you both surrender yourselves voluntarily in Phoenix for questioning, he's inclined to view the escape as a regrettable but understandable response to. How did he put it? Apparent irregularities in local judicial proceedings. In other words, show up in Phoenix willing to cooperate, and you'll likely face no charges for the escape. Isaac moved to Delilah's side, placing a supportive hand on her shoulder. When would we need to be there? Marshall wants to begin taking statements day after tomorrow. Tanner retrieved his hat and stood. I can escort you if you'd like. Might make the journey smoother if you're stopped along the way. The offer surprised them both. Why would you help us? Delilah asked. Sheriff Tanner looked uncomfortable but answered honestly. Because I've had my doubts about this case from the beginning. Edward's story never quite added up, but with Randall Blackridge breathing down my neck and the evidence pointing to you. He shook his head. I did my duty as the law required, but I never felt right about it. This is my chance to see justice done properly. Then we accept your escort, Isaac said firmly. We'll leave at first light. After the sheriff departed to make arrangements for their journey, Delilah and Isaac sat in stunned silence. the reality of this sudden turn of events slowly sinking in. "It's really happening," Delilah whispered finally. "We might actually clear my name." Isaac took her hands in his. "We will clear it. The truth is on our side, and now we have people willing to listen." "And afterward?" She looked into his eyes, searching for answers to questions she was afraid to ask directly. "What happens to us once this is over?" Isaac's gaze was steady, his voice certain. "That depends on what you want, Delilah. I know what I want: a life with you, whether it's at Silver Creek or somewhere else entirely. These past days have shown me that home isn't a place, it's a person, and you've become that for me." Tears welled in Delilah's eyes. "Even after everything, the scandal, the danger I've brought to your life." "Because of everything," he corrected gently. "Hardship reveals character, and yours is more beautiful than any I've known." He reached up to brush a tear from her cheek. "I love you, Delilah Vance. Whatever comes next, that won't change." "I love you too," she whispered, the words feeling both terrifying and perfect. "I think I have since you first called me a saint beneath those stars." Isaac smiled, drawing her close. "Then let's face Phoenix together, clear your name, and start the life we both deserve under those same stars that brought us together." As they held each other, the future still uncertain but brightening with each passing hour, Delilah marveled at how quickly life could change from prisoner to fugitive to possibly free woman in the span of a week, and from lonely shopkeeper to beloved partner in even less time. Whatever challenges awaited them in Phoenix, they would face them together, their bond forged in adversity and strengthened by love. For the first time since that fateful night in her shop, Delilah allowed herself to believe that justice and happiness might be possible after all. The journey to Phoenix took 2 days of hard riding, Sheriff Tanner setting a pace that left little time for conversation. Isaac rode alongside Delilah, watchful and protective, while Tanner led the way through mountain passes and lesser-known trails to avoid potential confrontations with Blackridge's men. They reached the territorial capital late on the second day, the setting sun gilding the adobe buildings and casting long shadows across the dusty streets. Phoenix in 1875 was still a small but growing settlement, its strategic location and designation as the territorial capital attracting businesses and government offices that gave it an air of permanence lacking in many frontier towns. Sheriff Tanner led them directly to the federal marshal's office, a solid brick building near the territorial government headquarters. Inside, they found a flurry of activity clerks moving between desks, deputies comparing notes, and in a private office visible through a glass-paned door, a distinguished-looking man bent over a stack of documents. "That's Marshal Henry Crawford," Tanner explained in a low voice. "One of the most respected lawmen in the territory. If anyone can untangle this mess fairly, it's him." The marshal looked up at their entrance, his shrewd eyes quickly assessing the 3 dust-covered travelers. He rose and came to greet them, his handshake firm and direct. "Sheriff Tanner. And you must be Miss Vance and Mr. Quinn." His gaze lingered on Delilah. "The governor has taken a personal interest in your case, Miss Vance. It seems the evidence your friends delivered raised serious concerns about the proceedings in Coolidge." "Thank you for agreeing to investigate, Marshal," Delilah said, summoning all her dignity despite her travel-worn appearance. "I've waited a long time for someone to hear the truth." "Truth is what we're after," Crawford assured her. "Though I should be clear you're still technically in custody, given the circumstances of your departure from Coolidge." "We understand," Isaac replied, his hand finding Delilah's. "We're here voluntarily to cooperate fully with your investigation." The marshal nodded approvingly. "Good. I've arranged rooms for you at the Arizona hotel under guard, of course, but considerably more comfortable than a cell. We'll begin taking formal statements tomorrow morning." He glanced at the wall clock. "It's late now. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day." As promised, the accommodations were comfortable adjacent rooms with real beds, clean linens, and private wash basins. A female deputy was assigned to stay with Delilah, while a male deputy stood watch in the hallway outside both rooms. It wasn't freedom, but after months in a cell and days on the run, it felt luxurious. After washing away the dust of travel and changing into fresh clothes provided by the marshal's office, Delilah was permitted to join Isaac for dinner in a private dining room off the hotel restaurant. Their guards remained discreetly present but gave them enough space for a semblance of privacy. "How are you feeling?" Isaac asked as they ate their first proper meal in days. "Nervous," Delilah admitted, "but hopeful too. Marshal Crawford seems fair, he does." And from what Sheriff Tanner said on the ride, the evidence against Edward is mounting. Apparently, several other women have come forward with stories about his behavior once they heard the governor was involved. Delilah's eyes widened. "Really? Who?" Tanner didn't say names, but mentioned at least 3 women from Coolidge and neighboring towns who described similar experiences: unwanted advances, threats when rejected. None ended in violence like yours, but it establishes a pattern. "A pattern that might finally break the Blackridge hold on justice," Delilah said, allowing herself to hope. "Have they arrived in Phoenix yet?" Edward and his father, Isaac's expression darkened. "Yesterday, according to Tanner." Randall Blackridge apparently stormed into the governor's office demanding explanations. Didn't get the reception he's accustomed to. "I would have liked to see that," Delilah said with the ghost of a smile. They finished their meal in comfortable conversation, both avoiding the topic of what would happen after the investigation concluded. The uncertainty still loomed too large to address directly, though in quiet moments, their eyes met with unspoken promises. The following morning, Marshal Crawford began the formal proceedings in a large conference room at the Territorial Government Building. Present were representatives from the governor's office, a court clerk to record testimony, Sheriff Tanner, and to Delilah's dismay, Edward and Randall Blackridge, seated at the far end of the table with a well-dressed lawyer between them. Edward looked much as she remembered, handsome in a polished way, his fair hair carefully styled, his clothes expensive. But his eyes, when they met hers, held a coldness that sent a chill down her spine. Beside him, Randall Blackridge's face was set in lines of barely contained fury, his knuckles white where they gripped the edge of the table. Marshal Crawford called the meeting to order with brisk efficiency. "We're here to establish the facts surrounding the shooting of Edward Blackridge on the night of April 17, 1875, and the subsequent charging of Delilah Vance with attempted murder. This is an investigative hearing, not a trial. All testimony will be recorded and may be used in formal court proceedings if such become necessary." For the next several hours, the marshal methodically built a timeline of events, calling witnesses in chronological order. Delilah gave her account first, describing Edward's arrival at her shop after hours, his drunken advances, her rejection, and the struggle that led to the accidental discharge of his own weapon. She spoke clearly and directly, meeting the eyes of everyone at the table, even the Blackridges. Next came Dr. Maxwell from Riverside, who confirmed that Edward had sought treatment for a gunshot wound before returning to Coolidge, claiming it was an accident while cleaning his weapon. The bullet he'd preserved matched Edward's Colt .45, not the smaller pistol later found in Delilah's shop. Martha Wilson testified to hearing Edward shouting threats before the gunshot, contradicting his claim that Delilah had invited him in. Jebediah Turner confirmed seeing Edward leave the shop with his gun still holstered, appearing angry but mobile, hardly the behavior of a man who'd just been shot by a woman intent on killing him. Most damaging were the testimonies of 3 other women who described encounters with Edward that followed a similar pattern: unwanted attention, persistence despite rejection, and in 2 cases, physical aggression stopped only by the intervention of others. Throughout these revelations, Edward's expression shifted from confidence to anger to growing unease. His father's face became progressively redder, his interruptions more frequent, until Marshal Crawford threatened to have him removed if he couldn't control himself. When Edward finally took the stand to give his version of events, his story began to unravel under Crawford's precise questioning. Inconsistencies emerged in the timing of events, in his description of the weapon, in his explanation for why he sought medical attention in Riverside rather than from Dr. Collins in Coolidge. "So you expect us to believe," Crawford said at last, "that Miss Vance invited you into her shop after hours, attempted to seduce you, then shot you when rejected, yet you didn't seek immediate medical attention in town, didn't report the shooting to Sheriff Tanner until the following day, and somehow the weapon used was found in her shop with no fingerprints except a partial one that might be hers?" Edward glanced at his father, then at his lawyer, who looked increasingly uncomfortable. "I was confused after being shot," he offered weakly, "not thinking clearly. Confused enough to ride 20 miles to Riverside for treatment, yet clear-headed enough to create an alibi about a gun-cleaning accident," Crawford pressed. By late afternoon, the weight of evidence had shifted decisively in Delilah's favor. Even the Blackridge's lawyer had grown quiet, his initial objections giving way to resigned note-taking. Finally, Marshal Crawford called a halt to the proceedings. "I believe we have sufficient testimony for today. I'll present my findings to the governor tomorrow morning. All parties should remain available for further questioning if needed." As the room began to clear, Randall Blackridge surged to his feet, pointing a finger at Delilah. "This isn't over," he snarled. "No one makes a fool of my family and gets away with it." "That's enough, Mr. Blackridge," Crawford said sharply. "Threats will not help your son's position." Isaac moved protectively to Delilah's side, his expression warning Blackridge to keep his distance. Sheriff Tanner similarly stepped forward, one hand resting meaningfully on his holster. Surrounded by these defenders, Delilah felt a surge of gratitude and strength. She met Randall Blackridge's glare steadily. "The truth isn't a threat, Mr. Blackridge. It's just the truth." The older man's face contorted with rage, but his lawyer placed a restraining hand on his arm, murmuring something that finally made him turn away and storm from the room, Edward following in his wake like a shadow. Marshal Crawford approached Delilah and Isaac after the Blackridges had left. "That went about as I expected," he said with grim satisfaction. "The governor will almost certainly dismiss all charges against you, Miss Vance, based on the evidence presented today." "And Edward?" Isaac asked. "Will he face charges for his false accusation, for what he tried to do to Delilah?" Crawford's expression turned regretful. "That's more complicated. Attempted assault is difficult to prove without witnesses, and while his story has clearly fallen apart, proving malicious intent in the accusation is another matter entirely." He sighed. "The Blackridges still have influence, even if it's diminished by today's revelations. I expect there will be a private settlement offered financial compensation for your wrongful imprisonment, Miss Vance, in exchange for not pursuing criminal charges against Edward." "Money," Delilah said flatly. After everything, it comes down to money. Unfortunately, that's often how justice balances its scales, Crawford admitted. But there's one more thing you should know. He lowered his voice. Edward Blackridge's reputation is effectively destroyed in this territory now. These testimonies, while confidential in theory, will become known. Arizona has little tolerance for men who abuse women and then lie about it. His father's money may shield him from prison, but not from public opinion. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was something. Delilah felt Isaac's hand find hers, warm and supportive. "What about the charges for our escape?" she asked. "Consider them dropped," Crawford said with a small smile. "The governor agrees that under the circumstances your actions were understandable if not strictly legal. You're both free to go, though I'd ask that you remain in Phoenix until the governor makes his official ruling tomorrow." Free. The word echoed in Delilah's mind like a bell. After months of confinement, weeks of uncertainty and days of fear, she was free or would be, once the governor confirmed what now seemed inevitable. "Thank you, Marshal," Isaac said, his voice rough with emotion. "For listening, for caring about the truth." "Just doing my job," Crawford replied, though his expression suggested it was more than that. "Truth and justice aren't always the same thing, but when they align, it's my duty to see them served." He tipped his hat to Delilah. "Good day to you both." That evening, with their guards withdrawn and their status changed from suspects to witnesses, Delilah and Isaac were free to dine openly in the hotel restaurant. The weight of months of injustice was lifting, allowing Delilah to truly smile for the first time since that fateful night in April. "What will you do now?" Isaac asked as they lingered over coffee. "Will you return to Coolidge, to your shop?" Delilah considered the question seriously. "I don't know, part of me wants to reclaim my life, show everyone I wasn't broken, but another part." She paused, looking into Isaac's eyes. "Another part of me wonders if there might be a different life waiting, somewhere else. Perhaps at a certain ranch by a Silver Creek." Isaac reached across the table, taking her hand. "Silver Creek Ranch needs a woman's touch," he said softly. "And I need you, Delilah. Not just because of what we've been through together, but because of who you are: strong, principled, beautiful inside and out." "Are you asking me to be your housekeeper, Mr. Quinn?" she teased, though her heart was pounding. "I'm asking you to be my wife," he replied without hesitation. "If you'll have a stubborn cowboy who couldn't mind his own business." Joy bubbled up within Delilah, bright and clean as mountain spring water. "I thought you'd never ask," she whispered, squeezing his hand. "Yes, Isaac. Yes to Silver Creek, yes to a new life, yes to you now and always." His smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "Then it's settled. Once the governor makes his ruling official, we'll make our own official with a preacher and rings and whatever kind of ceremony you want." "I don't need anything fancy," Delilah assured him. "Just you, under the same stars where you first called me a saint." "Then stars you shall have," he promised, raising her hand to his lips. The following morning brought the governor's official decree. All charges against Delilah Vance were dismissed, her record expunged, and as Marshal Crawford had predicted, a settlement offer from the Blackridges that included substantial financial compensation and the deed to her shop building, previously rented. "They're trying to buy your silence," Isaac observed as they reviewed the offer in Marshal Crawford's office. "And their son's freedom," Crawford added frankly. "It's your decision, Miss Vance. You could push for criminal charges, but it would mean months more of legal proceedings, public scrutiny, and no guarantee of conviction." Delilah finished for him. She looked at Isaac, finding strength in his steady gaze. "I want to move forward, not spend more of my life fighting the Blackridges. I'll accept the settlement, on one condition: that Edward leaves the Arizona Territory and never returns. Crawford nodded approvingly. I believe that can be arranged. His father has business interests in California. I understand. A fresh start might appeal to both Blackridges at this point. The papers were drawn up that afternoon, legal documents clearing Delilah's name, transferring ownership of her shop to her, and establishing the financial settlement. A separate agreement, witnessed by the governor himself, committed Edward to departure from the territory within 30 days, never to return while Delilah resided there. As they signed the final documents, Delilah felt a chapter of her life closing. The nightmare that had begun on a spring evening in her shop was ending here, in the clear light of summer, with justice imperfect but real finally served. Ready to go home? Isaac asked as they left the government building, the future stretching before them like an open road. Delilah smiled up at him, certain in a way she hadn't been in months. Yes, let's go home. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony on the porch of their newly repaired ranch house at Silver Creek. Jackson and Mrs. Reeves stood as witnesses, along with Sheriff Tanner, who had ridden out from Coolidge for the occasion. Reverend Williams from the Phoenix Methodist Church officiated, his kind face beaming as Isaac and Delilah exchanged vows against a backdrop of mountains painted gold by the setting sun. I take you, Delilah, to be my wife, Isaac said, his voice steady and sure. To stand by your side through whatever life brings, to honor your strength and courage, and to love you until the stars fall from the sky. I take you, Isaac, to be my husband, Delilah replied, tears of joy shimmering in her eyes. To build a life of truth and love with you, to face each dawn and dusk together, and to remember always how you saw the best in me when others saw the worst. As the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, the same stars that had watched over their flight from Coolidge, that had witnessed Isaac's declaration of faith in her innocence, that now blessed their union with ancient, constant light. The small gathering celebrated with a feast prepared by Mrs. Reeves, music provided by 2 of the Silver Creek miners who played fiddle and accordion, and dancing that continued long after the lamps were lit. Sheriff Tanner surprised everyone by revealing a fine singing voice, offering a rendition of Beautiful Dreamer that brought tears to more than one eye. Later, as their guests bedded down in the barn and bunkhouse, Isaac led Delilah to a blanket he'd spread on a hillside overlooking the creek. Above them, the summer sky blazed with stars, their reflection dancing in the water below. I wanted to give you this, Isaac said, placing a small wooden box in Delilah's hands. A wedding gift. Inside, nestled on velvet, lay a silver pendant in the shape of a star, inlaid with a tiny diamond at its center. It's beautiful, she breathed. Turn it over, Isaac urged. Engraved on the back were the words, My saint beneath the stars. Delilah's eyes filled with tears as Isaac fastened the necklace around her throat. I'll treasure it always, she whispered. Just as I treasure you, he replied, drawing her into his arms. My brave, beautiful wife. Their kiss deepened under the canopy of stars, passion building between them as it had been building since their first meeting. This time, there was no reason to hold back, no uncertainty to give them pause. They belonged to each other now legally, morally, completely. When they finally came together as husband and wife, it was with a tenderness born of shared struggle and a passion ignited by hard-won freedom. Their union, like their journey, was both an ending and a beginning, the closing of a chapter marked by injustice and fear, the opening of one filled with hope and possibility. Afterward, they lay wrapped in each other's arms, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead and listening to the gentle murmur of the creek below. "I never thought I could be this happy," Delilah confessed, her head resting on Isaac's chest. "When I was in that cell, I thought my life was over." "Instead, it was just beginning," Isaac said, stroking her hair. "Our life together." "What do you think the future holds for us?" she asked dreamily. Isaac considered the question, his arms tightening around her. "Silver Creek Ranch will prosper. We'll raise cattle and horses, maybe plant an orchard where that southern slope catches the sun. The house will grow as our family grows." He kissed the top of her head. "And every night, we'll look up at these same stars and remember how they guided us to each other." "That sounds perfect," Delilah sighed, nestling closer. And in that moment, beneath the vast Arizona sky, it was perfect, a love born in darkness, now flourishing in light. A woman once locked away for sin, now cherished as a saint beneath the stars. 5 years later, Silver Creek Ranch had grown into one of the most respected operations in the Arizona Territory. The original small cabin had expanded into a comfortable ranch house with a wide veranda, where Delilah often sat in the evenings, watching her husband work with the horses in the corral and their 3-year-old daughter, Rebecca, toddle after him with determined steps. Nearby, in a cradle fashioned by Isaac's own hands, their 2-month-old son Matthew slept peacefully, his tiny features a perfect blend of his parents'. Delilah's hand went to the star pendant that still hung at her throat, a constant reminder of their extraordinary journey to this ordinary, wonderful life. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew her attention. A rider was coming up the long drive from the main road, dust rising behind his horse in the late afternoon sun. As he drew closer, Delilah recognized Sheriff Tanner, now showing more gray in his mustache but sitting his horse as straight-backed as ever. "Isaac," she called, waving toward the corral. "Sheriff Tanner's here." Isaac looked up from the young colt he was training, his smile widening at the sight of their visitor. He scooped up Rebecca, who squealed with delight as he swung her onto his shoulders and came to join Delilah on the porch. "Sheriff," he greeted as Tanner dismounted. "Good to see you. What brings you all the way out to Silver Creek?" Tanner removed his hat, nodding respectfully to Delilah. "Mrs. Quinn, you're looking well." His weathered face softened as he noted the sleeping baby and the little girl perched on Isaac's shoulders. "Family's growing, I see." "Indeed it is," Delilah agreed with a smile. "Will you stay for supper? We have plenty." "Obliged for the offer, but I'm on my way to Phoenix." "Just stopped to deliver some news I thought you might want to hear." The sheriff's expression grew serious. "Randall Blackridge passed away 2 days ago. Heart gave out, they say." Isaac and Delilah exchanged a glance, both processing this unexpected information. "I'm sorry to hear that," Delilah said finally, and found she meant it. The years had softened the edges of her anger, allowing her to view the Blackridges with something approaching pity rather than hatred. "There's more," Tanner continued. "Edward's coming back to take over the ranch. Terms of your agreement said he couldn't return while you resided in the territory, but his lawyer's arguing that his father's death creates extenuating circumstances." Delilah felt a cold flutter of the old fear, quickly replaced by a steadying certainty as Isaac's hand found hers, warm and solid. "Does that concern you?" Tanner asked, watching their reaction carefully. Isaac looked to Delilah, letting her take the lead in this matter that had once so profoundly affected her life. She considered the question, looking at her beautiful daughter, her sleeping son, the home and life she and Isaac had built together. "No," she said finally, the word carrying the weight of hard-won peace. "Edward Blackridge has no power over me anymore. He belongs to a past I've long since left behind." The sheriff nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. "That's what I figured you'd say. Still, thought you should know." "We appreciate the warning," Isaac said, "but Delilah's right. We've moved beyond that chapter of our lives." They invited Tanner to at least rest a while before continuing his journey, and he accepted, sitting with them on the porch as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains. They spoke of local news, the railroad that would soon connect Phoenix to Tucson, the statehood discussions that seemed to gain momentum each year, the growth of Coolidge into a proper town with a school and 2 churches. As twilight deepened and the first stars appeared in the eastern sky, Tanner took his leave, declining once more their invitation to stay the night. "Need to reach the way station before full dark," he explained, mounting his horse. "But it does my heart good to see you folks thriving like this. Always knew you'd make something special out of Silver Creek." After he rode away, Isaac and Delilah remained on the porch with their children, watching the stars emerge one by one until the sky was ablaze with their light. Rebecca had fallen asleep in Isaac's lap, her small face peaceful in the lantern glow. Matthew stirred in his cradle, and Delilah lifted him gently, cradling him against her shoulder as she gazed out at the night. "Are you truly not worried about Edward returning?" Isaac asked softly, his arm slipping around her waist. Delilah leaned into his embrace, the solid warmth of him still a daily miracle after all these years. "5 years ago I might have been," she admitted. "But now, no, we've built something too strong to be threatened by ghosts from the past." Isaac nodded, understanding as he always did. "Still, if he causes any trouble, he won't," Delilah said with quiet confidence. "He'll be too busy trying to salvage his father's empire. And even if he did look our way, he'd find not a frightened dressmaker, but a woman surrounded by people who know the truth and stand with her." She smiled up at her husband. "A woman loved by a man who once called her a saint beneath the stars, and has treated her as something precious every day since." Isaac's eyes, still as blue and direct as the day they'd first met, held hers with a depth of feeling that made words unnecessary. He leaned forward to press a gentle kiss to her lips, careful not to disturb the sleeping children. "I love you, Delilah Quinn," he murmured against her mouth, "more with each passing day." "And I love you," she replied, her heart full to overflowing with the simple, profound truth of it. "My rescuer, my partner, my home." As if in blessing, a shooting star streaked across the heavens above Silver Creek, ranch, a brief, brilliant reminder of that night years ago when they had paused in their flight from Coolidge to watch the stars fall around them, finding in that moment a connection that had only deepened with time. Delilah tilted her face to the star-filled sky, grateful beyond words for the journey that had brought her here, from imprisonment to freedom, from accusation to vindication, from solitude to this rich tapestry of love and family. Once, she had been locked away for sin, branded by others' judgment and lies. Now, surrounded by the family of her heart and the home of her making, Delilah Quinn stood free beneath the same eternal stars, no longer defined by what had been done to her, but by what she had built from the ashes of injustice. A saint in the eyes of the man who loved her. A mother to the children who needed her. A woman who had found, against all odds, the justice and happiness that had once seemed as distant and unreachable as the stars themselves.